For 15 years, we had shared a life together. But over time, the spark that once defined our relationship faded into routine. Though we continued to live under the same roof, we existed in separate worlds, different rooms, different habits, no longer partners in any real sense. What once felt like companionship had become nothing more than coexistence. At first, I ignored the subtle signs, dismissing them as temporary distance. But as time went on, I started paying closer attention, and the truth became impossible to overlook. She was involved with someone else. Perhaps it hadn't become physical yet, but emotionally, she had already crossed that line. I recalled the times she had voiced her frustrations, her unhappiness, but I had grown deaf to her words, brushing off her concerns as trivial complaints. Her sarcasm, which I had once found playful, I had learned to tune out. But the moment the reality of our situation finally hit me, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just hearing her words anymore. I was truly listening. She was unhappy in our marriage, and whatever love she had once felt for me was gone. There was nothing left to salvage. Any attempt to fix what was broken would only push her further away, and I could see it in her eyes, the widening gap between us, the emotional distance that had become insurmountable. That's when I made a choice. Instead of clinging to a marriage that had already unraveled, I decided to let go. That night, I sat alone, a cold beer in my hand, replaying our last argument in my mind. I searched for a way to bring her back to me, but the harder I tried, the further she withdrew. Night after night, I retreated to the guest room, leaving her alone in the king-sized bed we once shared. I nursed my quiet resentment, convincing myself that if I could just say the right thing, things might change. Then, one night, a realization hit me like a tidal wave. Why was I fighting her on her own emotions? Her feelings were real to her, yet I had spent years trying to dismiss them, acting as if her unhappiness was something she had imagined. How blind had I been? From that moment, I stopped arguing. But another thought followed quickly behind, one that unsettled me even more. What about me? Was I happy? The answer settled in my gut like a heavy stone. No, I wasn't. I had been clinging to memories of what we used to be, holding on to a life that no longer existed. The truth was, I didn't love her anymore either. I was holding on to an illusion, a past that no longer matched our reality. That realization brought a strange sense of clarity. I knew something had to change. I spent a long time thinking, and eventually, I formed a plan, not a desperate attempt to fix things, but a decision to break free from the cycle I had been trapped in. Whether it worked or not didn't matter. What mattered was that I was done pretending, done living in denial. With finality, I downed the last sip of my beer, tossed the empty bottle into the trash, and made the choice to sleep in the guest room once again. But this time, it wasn't an act of retreat. It was part of something bigger. Just as I was about to turn in for the night, the door creaked open, and Amber stepped inside, flicking on the light. The sudden brightness made me squint as I turned my gaze toward her. "Why are you sleeping in here?" she asked, her voice breaking the quiet. I looked at her calmly. "Stayed up late. Didn't want to wake you," I answered simply. She studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before turning and heading to the kitchen. I knew she was making herself a cup of coffee, her lifelong habit. While she needed caffeine to wake up, I relied on a hot shower. As I prepared myself for the conversation I knew was coming, I felt strangely at ease, as if a burden had already started lifting from my shoulders. When I stepped into the living room, she was already there, sitting stiffly on the couch. Her hands were clenched into fists, tension radiating from her entire posture. I took my usual seat across from her, watching as she struggled to find the right words. Finally, she spoke. "Jerry," she began, her voice shaking slightly. This isn't working. I feel lost, disappointed. I don't think I love you anymore." I remained silent, letting the weight of her words settle between us. She took a deep breath, then continued. "We've been together a long time, but I think we need a divorce." The word hung in the air, heavy and final. But instead of reacting with anger or disbelief, I did something she hadn't expected. I smiled. Her eyes widened slightly, waiting for me to argue, to beg, to fight. Instead, I simply said, "That sounds good, dear." She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Jerry, did you even hear me?" I nodded. "Yeah. You don't love me anymore. Our marriage isn't working, and you want a divorce." "I agree. Her mouth opened as if to say something, but for a moment, no words came out. She searched my face, trying to decipher whether I was serious. "You really understand?" she asked hesitantly. Without hesitation, I stood, walked over to her, and knelt so we were at eye level. "Amber, I can't control how you feel. If you say you don't love me, I can't argue with that. And if you think you can't live with me anymore, then what's the point in fighting it?" She stared at me as if I had just spoken in a foreign language. But then, something shifted in her expression, a flicker of realization, maybe even a glimmer of respect. She had been prepared for a battle, but instead, I had given her something she wasn't expecting: acceptance. "Wait," she whispered, as if the words had escaped without permission. "You said, you don't love me either." I met her gaze and nodded. "Yeah, same as you." Her expression shifted, as though this wasn't the way she had envisioned the conversation unfolding. A flicker of emotions crossed her face: shock, uncertainty, maybe even a hint of regret. "Anything else?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "I need to get going. If we're settling this now, let's finish it." She hesitated before speaking again, her tone noticeably softer. "You're leaving? Right now?" I stood, reached for my jacket, and gave a slight shrug. "Yeah, thinking of hitting a few bars. Maybe even start looking for someone else. Seems fair, considering." Without waiting for a response, I waved a casual goodbye and stepped out, leaving her sitting there in stunned silence. At the first bar I came across, I ordered a bourbon and found a quiet corner away from the noise. As I took a sip, I pulled out my phone and called Rosalia, a coworker with a penchant for gossip. Playing the part of the heartbroken husband, I shared the shocking details of Amber's confession, casting myself as the wounded spouse drowning his sorrows in whiskey. Of course, I didn't tell her everything. I knew Rosalia would fill in the blanks on her own, already piecing together the drama in her mind. We had flirted before, and I knew she was single. It wasn't long before she invited herself to join me, offering to keep me company during what she called a difficult time. I agreed, but not without intention. I chose a bar I knew Amber and her friends often visited. The thought of being seen didn't bother me in the slightest. As far as I was concerned, my marriage was over. There was nothing left for either of us to hold on to. Rosalia arrived sooner than expected, clearly dressed to make an impression. Maybe she wanted to stake her claim before anyone else had the chance. At least, that's what I told myself. But the moment she saw me, I could tell she hadn't expected me to be so composed. My demeanor didn't match the news I had dropped on her earlier, and my easygoing smile only deepened her suspicion. "Jerry, what's going on?" she asked, settling onto the stool next to me, her brow furrowed. I lifted my hand and wiggled my fingers. My wedding ring was gone. "She wants a divorce. That's how she feels. Why should I fight it?" I signaled the waiter for another drink while Rosalia ordered her usual Cosmo. She studied me carefully, still trying to piece things together. "Over the phone you sounded, I don't know, more upset," she said, watching me closely. I took a slow breath before answering. "We've both been unhappy for a long time," I admitted. "I guess I finally realized I don't love her the way I used to. If she's ready to move on, so am I. I'm not about to sit around feeling unwanted and forgotten." Rosalia took a long sip of her drink, her gaze never leaving mine. I could tell my attitude unsettled her, whether it was confusion or something else. I wasn't sure. "Maybe we should dance," I suggested, not giving her the chance to refuse before taking her hand and leading her to the dance floor. She tilted her head up at me, searching my expression. "Jerry, what exactly are you planning to do?" I pulled her a little closer, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. "I'm going to give Amber everything she says she wants. And in the meantime, I'm going to do whatever I feel like." "And right now?" she asked. "Right now, I want to dance with you," I said with a small smirk. "Been wanting to for a while, actually." Rosalia's lips curled into a knowing smile, something flickering in her eyes, half amusement, half intrigue. "If this is just about getting back at her," she started, trailing off. I raised an eyebrow. "Maybe," I admitted. She leaned in, pressing against me as if the answer didn't bother her in the slightest. "I'm okay with that," she whispered, exhaling softly. Just like that, time slipped away. No checking my phone, no thoughts of Amber, no worries about when I was supposed to be home. Rosalia was fun, sharp, and, for tonight, completely mine. And we both knew it. But I didn't take her home. That wasn't the point. It was enough just to feel wanted again. Amber had bruised my ego, but Rosalia? She had put it back together. If I was being honest, Rosalia was even more attractive than Amber. We kissed in the parking lot beside her car. I opened the door for her, offering a slow, confident smile. "See you at work tomorrow," I said. She nodded, already understanding. I wasn't looking for something serious, just a little fun. And she was fine with that. By morning, I was sure the whole office would know. Now, I'd like to say I was mature about it, that I left it alone. But the truth? I was already looking forward to rubbing this in Amber's face. When I stepped through the front door that night, Amber was already in bed. But the second she heard me come in, she was up and out, meeting me in the hallway. "Where have you been?" she demanded. I hung my coat in the closet, not bothering to glance at her as I started to undress. "I went out," I said evenly. "Told you I was leaving. Why do you care?" For just a moment, her expression faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "Jerry, I was worried you might do something reckless," she admitted. I chuckled, shaking my head as I absorbed Amber's words. "Amber, I understand. I truly do. If this is what you want, I won't stand in your way. You want a divorce? Fine. I'll give you one. I have no intention of forcing you to stay with someone you no longer love." Grabbing my pillow and a change of clothes for the next morning, I turned toward the guest room. "Jerry," she called, her voice laced with hesitation. I paused, my belongings still in my arms. "What?" She lowered her gaze, avoiding my eyes. "I don't understand," she murmured before her voice softened. "You don't have to sleep in another room." I remained still, making her work for it. "Are you saying you want me to stay in our bedroom?" Her eyes widened, a single tear escaping down her cheek as she quickly wiped it away. "No, I didn't mean it like that. I mean, if you want to, you can still sleep here. But if you'd rather not, I can take the guest room instead." Her voice trembled with uncertainty, her expression revealing more than she likely intended. She wasn't just nervous, she was afraid. Afraid of what I might do next. Afraid I might actually leave. I decided to ease her tension. "Well, the bed is more comfortable," I admitted, placing my pillow back in its spot. "I'll stay, if that's not a problem." Relief swept across her face, her entire expression lighting up. "Oh, that's great. I mean, of course, it's no problem." "Then it's settled," I said, pulling back the covers. She opened her mouth to say something else, but I wasn't interested in prolonging the conversation. "Let's just go to sleep." By the following evening, I had drawn interest from 4 different women at work. One of my buddies even passed along his sister's number, mentioning that she was a widow looking for a solid, dependable man. By the end of the week, I had dates lined up with all 4 of them, including another with Rosalia. But tonight, I kept my schedule clear. There was something that needed to be settled with Amber once and for all. When I arrived home, she was waiting. Her posture was stiff, her expression guarded. "Lexi saw you last night," she said, her voice controlled but tight. "At the bar. She said you were with a woman." "Who was she? What were you doing with her?" I could have lashed out, thrown her hypocrisy in her face, reminded her of her own actions. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled and loosened my tie with deliberate ease. "I'll answer your questions after I change," I replied casually, walking past her. She pressed on, but I ignored her and headed upstairs. When I returned, Amber was still in the same spot, her eyes now flickering between anger and something else, something she was trying to hide. "It was Rosalia," I said simply as I took a seat across from her. "She's from work." Her breath caught, as though she had been bracing for an excuse I never gave. "What were you doing together?" she demanded. I met her gaze, unwavering. "We were on a date." The color drained from her face. "A date?" she repeated, her voice rising. I nodded. "Yes. You want a divorce, right? You don't love me anymore, so why shouldn't I start looking for someone who does?" Amber's anger faltered, giving way to something far more vulnerable. She sank into the chair, her voice quiet. "But what will people say?" she asked, the concern clear in her tone. "Lexi is already talking about you dating someone." I scoffed, standing up and pacing the room. "Don't you dare refer to Rosalia as someone," I said evenly. "She's a lady, and I treated her with the respect she deserves. Unlike you, she never lied about how she felt." Amber's expression crumbled. She understood exactly what I was implying. Last night, Rosalia had gone on a date with a married man. And Amber? Amber knew exactly how that felt. "I suppose you'd call a woman like that careless with her choices," I said. "But tell me, what do you call a married woman who sneaks around behind her husband's back?" Amber froze. Her face flickered between panic and realization. Then, as if on instinct, she snapped. What does that have to do with me? I let the silence stretch between us, watching her carefully. She searched my expression, and after a moment, I saw the truth settle in her eyes. Her voice wavered. How much do you know? Enough. I answered, my tone sharp. Whether or not you crossed a certain line doesn't matter anymore. You gave up on this marriage long before tonight. I'm done. I'm moving on. And since I can't count on support from my own wife, I'll take care of myself. Without another word, I walked into the kitchen and started making dinner. Amber lingered in the doorway, watching me in silence. I could feel the weight of her hesitation before she finally spoke. I'm sorry, she murmured. I put the dishes away without looking at her. Yeah, well, I'm sorry too. Drying my hands with a dish towel, I turned to face her. I've got plans the rest of the week. Don't expect me home early. And if it makes things easier, I can keep sleeping in the guest room. She didn't respond. That night, I went to bed alone, leaving Amber to face whatever thoughts kept her up. I met Amelia not long after. She was a kind-hearted woman, 35 years old, blonde, and divorced with 2 kids. Our first outing was simple, just coffee, but the conversation flowed so effortlessly that we decided to do something fun and spontaneous. Laser tag. Just the 2 of us against a horde of teenagers. We got absolutely demolished in every round, but neither of us cared. We laughed, joked, and took short breaks between matches. After one particularly brutal round, we collapsed onto the floor, catching our breath. I turned my head toward her, saw the glow of excitement in her eyes, and, without overthinking it, leaned in. She met me halfway, and our lips touched in a kiss that felt like a new beginning. After a pleasant dinner, I walked her home, and once again, we shared a kiss at her doorstep. Before slipping inside, she made me promise to take her out again soon. I agreed without hesitation. I braced myself for another tense encounter when I returned home, but something was different. Amber was quieter than usual, her demeanor subdued. Hello, she greeted softly. As I unbuttoned my shirt, I met her gaze with a small smile. Hey. She studied me closely, her expression unreadable. You seem like you had a good time, she remarked. Her tone was neutral, but there was an undertone of something more. I smirked. I did. Thanks for noticing. Amber hesitated before asking, how was your evening? For the first time in months, we had an actual conversation. More than that, we listened to each other. Eventually, she exhaled slowly, as if gathering the courage to say what had been weighing on her. I never slept with anyone else, she admitted in a small voice. I kissed a few men. I shared my feelings with Eric from work. He wanted more, but I wasn't ready. I observed her for a long moment before responding. Amber, I think we both have our share of blame in this. Even if you never crossed a physical line, you still betrayed me. We were supposed to be a team, and you walked away from that. I appreciate that you didn't take it further before asking for a divorce, but the damage was still done. And maybe I should have listened better instead of arguing with you about how you felt. She nodded, her face a mixture of regret and understanding. For a while, silence settled between us, both lost in thought. Then, in a shaky voice, she spoke again. Jerry, I'm so confused right now. I don't know if I want a divorce. I let out a short laugh. Well, let me know when you figure it out. Pushing myself off the couch, I stretched. I'm not throwing you out, and I'm not leaving. But I'm doing what's best for me. I had almost reached the guest bedroom when she called after me. Are you still going to see Rosalia? Without hesitation, I replied, yeah, Rosalia, and a few others. You do what you need to do, but I'm moving forward. She started to speak again, her voice trailing off. If we get divorced. I finished for her. Then it wasn't meant to be. Walking into the guest room, I barely had time to register the sound of footsteps before turning to see her standing in the doorway. Her face was unreadable. Jerry, she whispered. I pulled my shirt off. What? Her lips trembled. Come back to bed. Please. I hesitated. You think that's a good idea? Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. I don't know, she admitted. I just want you right now. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing. I carried her back to our bed and held her as she cried herself to sleep. Lauren had always been a great friend. We bonded over TV shows, geeked out over different fandoms, and had a natural ease in our conversations. That night, she wanted to go to a bar with live music, but none of her friends or dates were interested. So, I went with her. We had a good time, but there was no romantic connection, just friendship. And that was more than enough. I arrived home early, pulling into the driveway, only to notice a car already parked there. For a brief moment, jealousy flared. I inhaled deeply and forced myself to let it go. No point in stressing over something beyond my control. It was a technique I had learned in therapy while overcoming my fear of flying. Instead of spiraling into anxiety, my psychiatrist taught me to reframe my thoughts. Instead of thinking, oh no, I have to get on a plane, I learned to tell myself, oh wow, I get to go on a plane. I can't wait. It took time and practice, but eventually, it worked. I repeated that same mindset now as I stepped inside. Amber sat in the living room with Lexi, one of her friends. Jerry, Amber acknowledged, glancing up. I wasn't expecting you back so soon. I nodded toward Lexi. Lexi. She barely acknowledged me, offering nothing more than a cold stare. Work finished early, so here I am, I said casually, shrugging off my coat. Do you two need privacy? Amber and Lexi exchanged a glance. After a brief pause, Lexi stood. I should get going. Amber, we'll talk soon. Amber walked her to the door. When she returned, she looked at me, almost uncertain. Sorry, she murmured. I didn't mean to intrude. I smirked. This is my house too, you know. Her expression wavered, and for a moment, we both just stood there, unsure of what to say. When was the last time either of us had actually thought of this place as home? She shifted the conversation. Have you eaten? I glanced at the table, where the remains of her meal with Lexi still sat. Picking up a fork, I poked at the leftovers, considering my response. Instead, I asked, how are you? As I sat down. Amber sighed, sinking into her chair. I think I'm okay. I invited Lexi over to talk, but honestly, she just made me more confused. I raised an eyebrow. How so? She hesitated before answering. She told me I should kick you out, change the locks, and file for divorce immediately. Leaning back, I smirked. Well, my key still works, so I guess you didn't have time to call the locksmith. She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. Don't be ridiculous. I had to remind her that I was the one who asked for the divorce in the first place. After a moment, her gaze met mine, searching. And then she asked me something else. I tilted my head. What was that? Amber swallowed, her voice quieter now. She asked what rights I still had over you. I mean. She hesitated before finishing. I left you, right? Her voice wavered slightly toward the end, transforming what should have been a firm statement into something uncertain, almost like a question. She was searching for confirmation, some form of reassurance from me, but I remained silent. In the past, I would have immediately reassured her, told her she still had me, that she still mattered. But I wasn't that person anymore. Maybe this time, my silence would mean something different to her. Instead of addressing it directly, I steered the conversation elsewhere. Keeping my tone casual, I said, I have some bad news. My date for tomorrow night got canceled, which leaves me with extra concert tickets. Want to come with me instead? Her face instantly brightened. Oh, Jerry, I'd love to, she said enthusiastically. Then, almost as if she caught herself being too eager, she added more cautiously, I mean, only if you really want me to go. I shrugged. Well, I could always give the tickets to someone else at work. She reacted quickly. No. Then, composing herself, she continued, I mean, I'd be happy to go with you. A faint blush crept onto her cheeks as she nodded slightly. I let the moment linger before asking, you sure? She barely whispered, yes. I smiled. This might actually turn out to be fun. Later, I let Amalia know about the change in plans. She seemed a little let down but took it gracefully. That's just how things worked in the dating scene. Amber was ready when I picked her up after work, looking stunning, like she had put in extra effort, maybe even hoping I'd take notice. And perhaps I did. I wasn't familiar with the band. Amalia had suggested the concert, and I had bought the tickets based on her recommendation. Fortunately, it turned out to be a great show, loud, full of energy, and fun. And then, unexpectedly, we ran into Amalia. The moment Amber saw her, a flicker of realization crossed her face. In an instant, she pieced it together. Amalia had been my original date for the night. I offered Amalia an apologetic look before introducing them. Amalia, this is Amber. Amber, meet Amalia. Amalia was quick-witted, and I saw the moment she grasped the situation. Normally, when I introduced Amber, I referred to her as my wife. This time, I didn't. And Amber noticed. Nice to meet you, Amalia, Amber said, her eyes locked onto hers. An unspoken exchange passed between them. Always the tactful one, Amalia simply gave a polite smile and said, See you at work tomorrow, Jerry. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Amber, however, was simmering. She reached for my hand and squeezed it tightly. Jerry, where's your wedding ring? I shrugged. At home. Took it off after you asked for a divorce. Don't really need it anymore. She stared at me, visibly thrown off. Jerry, we're not divorced yet. I just smiled and turned my focus back to the music. Throughout the night, I made several trips to the bar, grabbing drinks. Each time, I felt Amber's eyes following me, watching closely. And each time, another woman would strike up a conversation. Some were casual and friendly, others were more forward. One woman even slipped me her number. Amber noticed. She didn't say anything, but the tension radiating from her was unmistakable. I had never been one to flirt much, at least not when I was married. But ever since Amber had brought up divorce, I had given myself permission to be more open. And, to my surprise, I was good at it. My blunt sense of humor turned out to be a hit, and now, without the restraint I used to have, I leaned into it. I wasn't the most attractive guy in the room, but I could make women laugh, and that made a difference. And for the first time in a long while, Amber was watching me. Maybe she was remembering what had drawn her to me in the first place. The drive home was quiet. Neither of us spoke. When we got back, we went through the motions of getting ready for bed. But before turning in for the night, Amber finally broke the silence. Jerry, where's your wedding ring? I gestured toward the dresser. In the sock drawer. She walked over, pulled out the small gold band, and let it rest in her palm. She stared at it for a long time before turning to face me, her eyes filled with unshed tears. It's yours now, I said simply. Do whatever you want with it. Sell it. Throw it away. It doesn't matter to me. She hesitated. What should I do with it? She asked softly. I met her gaze. That ring symbolized our love, our marriage. At one time, it was a shield, a way to show the world that I was off limits. And I suppose I always hoped your ring did the same for you. I exhaled, shaking my head slightly. But ever since you decided not to be with me anymore, I don't need it to protect me. Now, it's just a reminder of what used to be. Taking a step closer, I gently closed her fingers around the ring. When the time comes, you'll know what to do with it. She held it tightly, saying nothing. As I lay down, drifting towards sleep, she whispered, Thank you for tonight. I really enjoyed the concert and spending time with you. I mumbled, Anytime, before sleep overtook me. When I woke up the next morning, breakfast was waiting, eggs and bacon. Amber had gone out of her way to cook something for me. I appreciated the gesture. But what caught my attention wasn't the food. It was the way Amber kept fidgeting with her wedding and engagement rings, absent-mindedly twisting them around her finger as we ate. I remained silent, simply observing. Later that day, while I was at work, my phone vibrated unexpectedly. It was Lexi. That was unusual. She had never called me before. I answered, surprised. Lexi? Didn't expect to hear from you. What's going on? She didn't waste a moment. Meet me at Bohemia. 7:30. Then she hung up. I stared at my phone, unsure of what to make of it. Lexi and I had never been particularly close. She was one of Amber's colleagues, always standing by her side and never mine. Throughout my entire marriage to Amber, Lexi had never gone out of her way to be friendly with me. And now, out of the blue, she was calling me directly. Whatever this was about, it wasn't going to be small talk. When I walked into the bar, the same place where I had first met Rosalia, I spotted Lexi sitting at a table draped with a crisp white linen tablecloth. She waved me over, though her tightly pressed lips made it clear this wasn't going to be a pleasant discussion. As soon as I sat down and the waiter took our orders, she fixed me with a sharp glare. What exactly do you think you're doing? She demanded. Amber is suffering, and you're out with other women, right in front of her. For the first time in a while, I felt a heat rise to my face, a mix of irritation and something that might have been guilt. I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to fire back. Whatever I said now would undoubtedly make its way back to Amber, and I had no intention of giving Lexi more fuel for the fire. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, I leaned forward. Lexi, how much do you actually know about what's happening between Amber and me? Her nostrils flared. I know her husband is behaving like a complete fool, she snapped. I took a moment to glance around, noticing the nearby patrons subtly tuning into our conversation. Lowering my voice, I kept my gaze steady. Lexi, let's cut through the nonsense. Be honest with me. Answer my question, and I'll answer yours. I have nothing to hide. She hesitated just as the waiter returned with our drinks, her shoulders tense. Finally, she exhaled, her voice quieter than before. Amber is confused, she admitted. so confused that she thinks seeing other men might help her figure out what she really wants. Her fingers tightened around her water glass as a faint blush colored her cheeks. She's having a weak moment, Jerry. A dry chuckle escaped me. Oh, is that so? I said, lacing my words with sarcasm. And yet, I'm the fool in this situation? Lexi didn't answer, but I could see a flicker of unease cross her face. We've just been trying to help her figure things out, she added quickly. That was the part that struck a nerve. I leaned in, my tone calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. And that's exactly my problem, Lexi. Why do you and her friends feel the need to get involved in our marriage? She parted her lips as if to respond but remained silent. What gives you that right? I pressed. She's my friend, she said quietly. So what? I countered. Shouldn't I be her best friend? Her partner? The one she trusts the most? If she was struggling, shouldn't she have come to me first? I shook my head, my frustration evident. But instead of working things out with the man she promised to spend her life with, she turns to you. And you and her friends, what do? You take her to places where she can figure things out with other men, men who have no issue with kissing someone else's wife. Lexi visibly paled, her confidence fading along with her appetite. I let the silence settle before I continued. Let me ask you something, Lexi. Are you married? She shook her head. Have you ever been married? Another shake. I raised an eyebrow. Do you have a degree in counseling? Nothing. Then why do you think you're qualified to give advice about my marriage? I challenged. You've never been married, you have no clue what it's like, yet you believe you have the right to interfere. You think you know what's best for Amber. Lexi's eyes widened, caught off guard. You and I have barely spoken in all these years, I continued. How many real conversations have we ever had? Once? Twice? You only know Amber's version of the story. But do you actually know me, the man who has been her husband for 15 years? Lexi's lips trembled, and I knew I had struck a nerve. Good. I took a slow sip of my drink, allowing my words to sink in before I delivered my final point. Amber told me exactly how she feels, I said, setting my glass down deliberately. She said, word for word, I don't love you anymore. I met Lexi's eyes. So tell me, what exactly am I supposed to do with that? What magical words do you think I can say to change her mind? I leaned back in my chair. She wants a divorce. She made that clear. So why should I sit around, miserable, just waiting for her to maybe change her mind one day? Pushing my untouched plate aside, I stood up, leveling Lexi with one last look. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that other women see something in me that Amber no longer does. She's the one who pushed me away. I didn't push her. And I won't put my life on hold just because she's unsure of what she wants. I exhaled slowly. How she feels about that? That's her concern, not mine. I'm not here to convince her, and I'm not here to wait for her to change her mind. I've accepted reality. As soon as I made my way out of the bar, I didn't need to turn around to know that the moment I stepped through those doors, Lexi would be dialing Amber's number. It didn't matter. I had my own thoughts to sort through. That night, I met Hannah. Unlike the others, there was something about her that set her apart. She was young, strikingly beautiful, and had a natural magnetism that drew people in. Hannah, a confident black woman, carried herself with a quiet strength. When she first joined our company, our interactions were strictly professional, just polite nods exchanged in passing. But then, one day, everything shifted. I had been entertaining a group of guys at work with a joke, one that was on the riskier side, just as Hannah entered the room behind me. I noticed the change in the group first. Some of them stiffened, others held their breath, their expressions uneasy. Sensing something, I turned around and met Hannah's gaze. Her face gave nothing away at first, her eyes narrowed, lips pressed in a firm line. With a grin, I looked at her. Come on, admit it. That was funny. She stood there for a moment, taking my measure, then slowly shook her head as if amazed at my boldness. And then, just like that, laughter bubbled out of her. From that moment on, she was part of the crew, one of us. But tonight? Tonight, she was something else entirely. By the time our date ended, Hannah made her intentions unmistakable. She was willing to go further than anyone I had been seeing lately. And when she finally invited me to stay, I hesitated. As much as I wanted to accept, something inside me resisted. So, I declined. For the first time in what felt like forever, I made a decision that felt entirely my own. There were still unresolved matters between Amber and me, things I had to face before I could truly move forward with someone else. Later that night, as I settled into bed, Amber's voice broke through the silence. Jerry. Yeah. I turned to her, barely able to make out her face in the dim light. Please take a shower. Something in her voice wavered, making me pause. Why? I asked, confused. Without answering, she switched on the bedside lamp. Her face came into view, flushed, her cheeks damp with fresh tears. She avoided my eyes. Please, Jerry, she whispered. If you don't, I'll have to ask you to sleep in the guest room. Her words hit me like a slap. What's going on? She exhaled shakily. I can't stand the smell of her on you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You reek of her. The realization struck me like a wave. She was talking about Hannah. I hadn't even noticed. Guilt settled deep in my chest. I'm sorry, I murmured, feeling the weight of her pain. I can sleep in the guest room if that's what you want. No, she sobbed. I want you here. But not like this. Just wash her sin off of you. It's already hard enough knowing you're seeing other women. I can pretend you're just out with the guys. I can ignore the whispers from my friends about who they've seen you with. But this, I can't ignore. I can smell her on you. I know. I moved closer, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. I was careless, I whispered. I'll shower. Then I'll come back to bed. That night, exhaustion finally caught up with me. After a week of late nights and endless distractions, my body was beginning to feel the strain. I slept in the next morning, only waking when I caught the scent of breakfast drifting in from the kitchen. When I walked in, Amber was already at the stove, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. As I took a seat, she placed a plate in front of me. Any plans this weekend? She asked, her voice calm. I shook my head. Nothing planned. She reached into her pocket, hesitating for just a moment before pulling something out. Then, slowly, she lowered herself onto one knee in front of me. I froze. Opening her palm, she revealed my wedding ring. Taking my hand gently, she looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen in a long time. I want to work on our marriage, she said softly. I think. Maybe I didn't think everything through. Carefully, she slid the ring onto my finger. I didn't stop her. I still love you, she whispered, her voice filled with vulnerability as she remained on her knees, waiting for my response. For a long moment, I simply looked at her. Do you really mean that? I finally asked. She nodded, the sincerity in her eyes undeniable. No divorce, she said with quiet certainty. I let out a slow breath. And the other men? I asked, unsure of where this was going. There's no one else but you, she answered without hesitation. Then came the hard part. You need to understand something, I said carefully. I'm still going to see other women. Amber swallowed, searching my face for something in answer, a reason. We sat there in silence, staring at each other, the unspoken words hanging heavy between us. Then, after a long pause, something in her shifted. Finally, she nodded, almost to herself. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, she murmured. Then, with a sad, knowing smile, she added, I think I'm in love with you too. I reached for her, pulling her into a deep kiss, one filled with intensity, longing, and something else neither of us had dared acknowledge for a long time. She kissed me back just as desperately, as though a barrier between us had finally shattered. Over the years, Amber had struggled with her sense of self-worth. Here's the rewritten version of your passage while maintaining the meaning, structure, and emotional depth. Until now, I hadn't fully grasped it, but at this moment, it was undeniable. In some ways, I had treated her well, yet it hadn't been enough. Rather than validating her emotions, I had dismissed them. Whenever she tried to express herself, I countered, questioned her reasoning, and insisted she was wrong. How arrogant had I been? How harmful was it to tell someone their feelings didn't matter? That kind of behavior built up resentment, silently chipping away at our relationship. Little by little, Amber stopped valuing our marriage. Perhaps that was on me. Over time, we changed. Well, she did. I stayed the same. And now, I wasn't even sure if I wanted things to return to the way they once were. Amber must have recognized it, too. She knew that if she chose to leave, there were others who would gladly take her place. Do you really need to see other people? She asked, her voice quiet. I offered a reassuring smile. I'm not planning to see other men, I countered. But yes, I'll be seeing others from time to time. I met her gaze. You're my wife. But remember, I'm your husband. She absorbed my words before a small, knowing smile crossed her lips. Take me to bed, she murmured. Show me what I've been missing. Show me what these other women see in you. A smirk played on my lips. You think I have what you need? She shot me a playful glance. I'll show you my love, she teased. And maybe wear you out so much you won't have the energy for anyone else. Challenge accepted. I lifted her into my arms, carrying her toward the bedroom. There was no hesitation between us, no second-guessing. Clothes disappeared in hurried movements, hands exploring, seeking. Passion ignited, intense and uninhibited. She claimed me. Then I claimed her. Then she took me once more. And somewhere in the midst of it all, something dawned on her, something unspoken yet understood. I hadn't actually been with any of those women. After 15 years of marriage, she knew exactly what I was capable of. But she didn't mention it. She didn't need to. For the rest of the day, Amber carried that knowing smile. I let her keep it. Neither of us spoke about my dates. Neither of us brought up the men she had kissed or confided in. It was a chapter better left behind. From that moment forward, Amber looked at me differently. With admiration. With respect. I never thought my plan would work, at least, not like this. It hadn't been flawless. At first, I had been too proud to let her see how deeply her words had hurt me. But when I noticed how she reacted to me moving on while she remained in place, I pushed things further. I had wanted her back, but I knew clinging to her, pleading for her to stay, would only push her further away. People desire what they can't have, and they take for granted what's always been there. By setting both of us free, we had somehow drawn closer than ever before. As for seeing other women, I hadn't needed to. Not yet. But Amber understood that if she ever fell into old patterns, I wouldn't hesitate. She knew that. And so did I. Subscribe to stay ahead of cheaters. And trust me, what's coming next makes this story look like a fairy tale.